Good evening. Can I have your attention, please? So, may I request Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, Lieutenant General Khandare, and uh, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla to come on stage. Ambassador Malhotra is on his way, and knowing the Delhi traffic is stuck, and I'm sure we're going to have him very soon here. So, ma'am, please. So, namaste and good evening to all of you. I'm Dr. Manish Dabhade. I'm the founder of the Indian Futures and I teach diplomacy in the School of International Studies, JNU. I welcome you all today. And we obviously have assembled here for a panel discussion on war and peace in Ukraine, state of play, organized in collaboration with the India Habitat Center. And obviously, you can see we have assembled an incredible star panel who have immense wisdom and experience to zoom in on the theme for today's evening. Let me begin by welcoming Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, who is in fact going to be the chairperson for today. She's a former Indian diplomat who has had an illustrious career spanning decades and extremely and handling extremely high profile responsibilities, and in fact is a key witness to many critical moments in India's diplomatic history. She is author of at least two blockbuster volumes. She has written, authored The Indentured Labor and The Root, and India and European Union, and Insider's View, which are in fact strong recommended reads in our syllabuses in JNU. Uh, so she has had, and in fact, the best part about her is that she has broken many glass ceilings by the sheer power of her intellect and leadership, including being the first woman president of the India Habitat Center. So thank you, ma'am, for readily agreeing to partner with us today, the Indian Futures. And in fact, this is the first in a series of programs we have lined up in the next weeks and months. Thank you again. We would be joined by Ambassador Ajai Malhotra, who has been a distinguished fellow in TERI and also has been a former Indian ambassador to Russia and a very strong Russia hand. In fact, he speaks fluent Russian and has also interacted with President Putin in his various avatars, in his various stints in the MEA, and also has visited Ukraine several times. So I'm sure he'll be joining us very soon. We are equally honored to have Lieutenant General Raj Shukla with us, who is a member UPSC. I can see some students here who might also be excited about what Sir has to say, but he was also, 4 decades, has again an illustrious career in the Indian Army, was DG Perspective Planning, Commandant of Army War College and RTRAC, and is also a media star. I always see him on various extremely popular national and international podcasts. Thank you, sir, for taking time out to be with us today evening. We are equally fortunate to have Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare with us. He is currently the principal advisor in the Ministry of Defense, has been a military advisor to the National Security Council Secretariat, and very importantly also handled as DG Defense Intelligence Agency in the Ministry of Defense. Most importantly, Khandare sir has been a mentor and a family to the Indian Futures. So it's an honor to have you with us. So with this, may I now invite Ambassador Mukherjee to give her chairperson's remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this evening, interactive evening, which I hope will be one of many. This initiative comes from the fertile mind of Professor Dabhade, who I have met because of my many visits to JNU to give lectures. And it was his idea, and I thought that the topic was suggested by me because I think that there are two topics today which are of direct significance and which impact international peace and security. One is Ukraine Russia conflict, and the other is what is unfolding now between Hezbollah and Israel. In both, the Security Council is completely unable to act, and therefore, the role of India becomes even more important. We have a very distinguished panel with us who has been introduced. Ambassador Ajai Malhotra will be joining us shortly. Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, who is also the batchmate of External Affairs Minister Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, learned Russian with him in Moscow. They both are interpreter level Russian speaking officers, as indeed I am interpreter level French speaking officer. This is something we insist on in the Indian Foreign Service to have very high level linguistic skills. Ajay Malhotra also has a very long and personal relationship with President Putin, whom he met 6 years before he became president of the Russian Federation. Um, he was, when he was ambassador to the Russian Federation, co chair with President Putin of an Indo Russian friendship group that used to send Russians to India to know more about India. And they used to also co chair a popular TV quiz show on India, where President Putin himself would ask tricky questions about India to the Russian audience to see whether they know enough about India or not. That's the kind of exposure that Ambassador Ajay Malhotra has, apart from the fact that he is also an expert on the entire region, Central Asian, Caucasus, and Ukraine. I just wanted to kick off the discussion by pointing out that the entire Russia Ukraine conflict, which will be discussed in detail by my very distinguished military colleagues from a military perspective, from a diplomatic and foreign policy context, began when the West did not accept anymore the red lines that were drawn up after the breakup of the USSR. When the USSR broke up, there were certain red lines that were unanimously agreed upon on both sides by the former USSR and by the United States and NATO. And one was that NATO would never move beyond a certain level so that Russia would feel that NATO has become an existential threat to its peace and security. That included neutrality for the former Baltic states, and that included a gentleman's understanding, which was cemented by the Minsk Accords later with regard to the status of Ukraine. When when the West, very foolishly in my perspective, started encouraging NATO membership for Ukraine while fully understanding that Ukraine does not have the necessary criteria till today for NATO membership, it crossed one very important red line. Thereafter, they also forgot that, as Prime Minister Bajpayee used to remind us about Pakistan, that a country cannot change its history and geography, though actually looking back, I would have said we can change our geography by conquest, but we are not a conquering nation. That's why we didn't change our geography. Otherwise, if we wanted to change our geography, even today we can change our geography, but we cannot change our history. Russia has demonstrated it can change geography, but the West has forgotten that it cannot change its history. It cannot forget, it should not forget that Russia, at the end of it, at the end of the game, is white, European, and fully a European state, which has played a very important role in Europe's history for centuries. It cannot be wished away by saying that it is an Asian state. In fact, it is much more European than Turkey, which is accepted by the EU as fully European. Though if you visit both states, you would think Turkey, in fact, is more Asian in many, many ways. And we should know because we were conquered by the Turks in the 10th century. And Delhi today has many corners which is Turkish. Turkey is much more European. No, it's much more Asian. Russia is much more European. And I would also say that the Westphalian order, which was established after World War II, which brought peace to Europe after a long time, because Europe was always at conflict with each other until the European Union was established, was based also on a fundamental understanding of the balance of power, which was so beautifully put by Henry Kissinger which I read in my MA final in history in Miranda House in 1975, where he had written an article, which I've never forgotten, on why the Treaty of Versailles failed and why did the Congress of Vienna succeed. The Congress of Vienna succeeded because it was based on balance of power, so that the power that was defeated was not desperate enough to seek to reverse the peace treaty. The power that was victorious was not tempted to seek more. Whereas the Congress, the Treaty of Versailles, was based on what the then British Prime Minister said: Germany must be squeezed till its pips squeak like an orange. Germany was squeezed till its pips squeak. So you had the Weimar Republic, you had the rise of fascism, you had an unbalanced power treaty which tried to push back Germany 100 years back, and you had the inevitable World War II. The Westphalian order that was established after World War II was based on balance of power and multipolarity, which got disturbed by the Russia Ukraine conflict because both sides forgot the balance of power. And as Henry Kissinger said before he died, when he was 99 years old, he said that if the conflict continues much longer, Ukraine runs the imminent risk of becoming irredeemably dysfunctional. And once it comes to an end, let's say it becomes the Bosnia of Eastern Europe, what use is it to the West? And if Russia was to end up as China's Belarus, how would that be of any benefit to the West? How would either of these scenarios be in the interest of the West? This is something that the West needs to ponder on, that Russia is going nowhere, China is going nowhere. And if China has become an existential threat in the Indo-Pacific, both to India and to the West, then what use is there in driving Russia into China's arms as a junior partner? How would it be of any use, keeping in mind, in any case, that it's not such a perfect relationship between the dragon and the polar bear? Those empty northern spaces in Russia have always hugely attracted the Chinese, who've always sought, as Hitler did, extra space for their extra people. That's why they eye Arunachal Pradesh. That's why they eye the line of actual control. That's why they're sitting on Akshay Chin. And that's why, too, they eye those empty spaces of Russia. And do you think that President Putin is not aware of that? He's fully aware of it. But between a rock and a hard place, you don't have much choice for allies. I'll stop here and kickstart the discussion by requesting my colleague, Lieutenant General Shukla, to take over. And please give him a big hand. We are so happy to have him here.
So panel chair, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, Lieutenant General Khandare, Ambassador Ajai Malhotra, in whose absence I've been promoted up the batting order. I hope I don't get out for a duck. Dr. Manish, Dabhade, friends, ladies and gentlemen. So the subject, as we all know, is war and peace in Ukraine, state of play. I have about 12 minutes. So I shall time enough just to make 3-4 points for your very kind consideration. But may I point out that in my view, there are key lessons coming out of Ukraine. It is both a mirror and a laboratory for the future, and huge learnings in our context too. So I'll merely point them out, and we could discuss their deeper import in the Q&A to follow. So the first point that I would like to make is this, that it does seem to me that national security and technology are driving geopolitics like never before. And the best example of that is Ukraine. Geopolitics is also terribly unforgiving of those that are disrespectful to national security. It spares nobody, not even the mighty United States of America. And so just let me illustrate this with a few examples. You would have heard of a town called Advika. It's a town in Ukraine. It fell in February 2024 to the Russians. Now, an operational audit was carried out 2 days before the decision to surrender was taken. And I'm quoting the CIA Director, William Burns, no think tank. He says one of the Ukrainian brigades had barely 15 artillery rounds left, and the other brigade had 42 mortar rounds left. So Advika fell not because the Ukrainians lacked bravery, valor, or the will to fight, but because the West's arsenal of democracy, and this was a coinage attributed to President Roosevelt, who constantly reminded the West that if you wish to protect Western values and democracy, make sure that your weapon arsenals are in fine fettle. And this advice was neglected, and you see the mighty West failed to resource the fight. I'll give you another example, AD interceptors. So I'm told the Russians are firing 4,000 missiles into Ukraine annually on an average. So if you need 2 missiles to intercept one, you need 8,000. And this is news to me. The mighty Americans, when they have opened up their order books, cannot produce 700 missiles in a year. Advika. The Russians are able to muster 11 to 12 times the artillery that Ukraine is able to fire. So with this preponderance of artillery barrages, towns which were falling in 5 to 6 months are now falling in 6 to 7 days. The last example. Once the Americans have opened up their order books, I'm told they'll step up their artillery production to 1.5 million rounds per month. But by when? By the end of 2025. So it takes time for your military-industrial complex to gain momentum. The Russians are already firing 5 million rounds a month. What's they have in their stockpile? It shouldn't surprise us who is on the roll. A Russian victory will impact the geopolitics of Europe and perhaps have global ramifications. So that is how national security, and we'll come to technology, I say is driving geopolitics like never before. And it is extremely brutal with those who don't respect national security. Taiwan, not directly connected with today's topic, a CSIS, an American study, tells us that USA does not have more than 7 days of missiles and precision munitions for a Taiwan fight. In 1995, you'd recall, when the Chinese, acted funny over Taiwan, Bill Clinton dispatched 2 aircraft carriers and the Chinese backed off. Today, in response to a very potent A2AD, all that Admiral Paparo can offer is Hellscape, which is basically autonomous bluster. So the whole point is this, and this could signal the end of American power projection in the Western Pacific. Some observers say that it may be the Suez moment for the USA. So these are the terrible implications, of neglecting your national security. Today, if you go to a whole lot of these think tank channels and other channels, the American defense and military brass is being questioned. I mean, the question being asked is, why should the American taxpayer spend $950 billion to nurse these 800 bases in 70 countries, 11 aircraft carriers, when the American military machine is an opera of failing deterrence? Afghanistan, Ukraine, respectively in Taiwan. So the lesson for India is, of course, we must be more respectful of national security. There are a number of things we've done. There are a number of more things that we need to do. And the larger lesson is this, that we are enjoying, while the world is enveloped in conflict, we are enjoying a very healthy, or say lucky, peace dividend. We must make the most of this peace dividend, because if for some reason conflict comes our way in 2027, 2028, we are not embarrassed by the Advika moment. And that will happen if we nurse our national security. Many argue that deterrence is costly. I would say wars are costlier. Ask the Ukrainians. So that's the first lesson that I would like you to kindly ponder about. The second is about, this whole question, and this gets raised in many think tank circles in India. What is the optimal right battlefield geometry? Is it trench warfare? Is it technology? And a lot of questions that technology will replace troops and so on and so forth. In my view, the lesson coming out of Ukraine is this, that 3 eras of war fighting are coexisting, blending seamlessly. So you have the blood and gore of trench warfare. It's a reality. We are back to World War I. You have hand breaching of mines, the squadron company fights, the basics of combat. You also have Cold War era legacy instruments, tanks, artilleries, F-16s. You need to keep them in good shape. But what is really taking both these instruments to a new high is bleeding edge technologies. And that has to be considered. I'll just give you some examples that is simply bleeding edge, mind-boggling. To win modern wars, your military bandwidth must stretch across these three domains. There are no shortcuts. Technology, in my view, is not a substitute for troops. It enables the war fighter. In that sense, it's a battle-winning factor, but manpower matters too. Look at the Russians. They have a 4.4:1 advantage over the Ukrainians. And so at some stage, I mean, they are back in the business. The resilience of the military-industrial complex, and all the examples that I gave you, and therefore the great salience of Atmanirbharta in defense. Some of it is working very well, but we need to take a stock of our inventories and stockpiles, because we have always premised conflict on a swift, short war. That doesn't seem to be the modern reality. So we need to take care of this. And Atmanirbharta in defense will not do unless the larger Made in India project also takes off. See, I'll give you an example. The Chinese, I'm told, in 2014, their manufacturing capacities value added were half of that of the Americans. In 2023, they are twice that of the Americans. In consequence, the Chinese military-industrial complex on American admission is 5 to 6 times more efficient than the Americans. So the connect between the larger Made in India, Atmanirbharta and defense, and therefore it's just not a military thing. All these things have to kick off if we have to take care of our northern neighbor. Why China is also winning, and this is noteworthy, is because of the complete or the extreme lack of will resolve on part of the West. Liberal democracies, this weak-willed response is fatal. I'll give you some examples. So there's a report from the Kiel Institute, and many people have backed it, many experts, the Polish foreign minister, Neil Ferguson, so many on and so forth. They say that sanctions are a farce, a charade. The net Russian earnings from fossil fuels, exports, LPG, gas are as high as pre-war levels or marginally lower. And what is actually happening is that dual-use equipment from Europe is being shipped to Russia either through shadow ships or through Tajikistan and Kazakhstan. The West are violating their own sanctions. And that shouldn't surprise us, and that's the reason Putin has weaponized the gas. He's also weaponizing this weak European resolve. The Russian economy seems to be in pretty good shape, and it has been restructured for war. It is surging in many ways. So we have to take note of all this. Look at the Germans. They are spending 2% on defense. Russia is spending 7% on defense. There was an article I read the other day that all the rearmament plans that are being talked of in the media for Germany at current rearmament rates will take 100 years to deter Russia. So deterrence, this fail-proof deterrence that I was referring to is serious business. It needs close attention, and it takes a long time to manifest. And look at this. One of the reasons for the conflict was Ukraine joining NATO. That was one of the reasons. And the supreme irony is that hypothetically, even if Ukraine were to join NATO, NATO is going to be an ossified alliance under threat, weak, drifty, certainly not a battle-winning entity. And there is much in the Western media and the Russian media which talks about it. So war, if I may remind you, Clausewitz said, is an act of force to compel the adversary to do your will. And if the will is weak, all else will be of little use. So that is the second lesson. Or in just the last point in this, in the Cold War, the conventional edge was with USSR, but nuclear superiority was with USA. Today, the West is in danger of ceding both the conventional and the nuclear edge to Russia. Escalation dominance lies squarely with the Russians. In the lesson in our context, in terms of our equation with China, in terms of our conventional edge and our nuclear edge, must be seriously examined. And 3, the central overwhelming lesson from the Ukrainian theater is this, that what ultimately matters, I spoke of those bleeding edge technologies, innovation, creativity, talent, imagination are proving to be battle-winning factors. I'm now quoting General Mark Milley, the recently retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He says that AI startups like Helsing, and there are 250 in number, have brought about the most fundamental and profound changes in the character of war in recorded history. Now that's saying something. This is what all these technologies and startups have done. The lead in Ukraine are not DARPA, they are not defense or governmental organizations, they are not defense primes, but a whole range of startups. In that context, whatever IDEX in our case has created these startups, we need to really make sure that we give them a fillip so that they can take all these combat effects with speed to the squadron company fight, to the battle theaters. I'll just amplify this with two examples. Look at the birth of the drone moment in warfare. What has suddenly happened? I'll just take 1 minute more. The drone moment in warfare. That you had these AD systems of both the countries in mutual deterrence. So you had air-crewed weapon platforms unable to penetrate, and that gave burn to drones and all that imagination of the startups and all. You have drones penetrating trench lines, drones penetrating tanks. They're also being used as strategic air power to blast the Ukrainian energy grid. And there are numerous examples, for all this, what is happening in terms of the AI robotics chain. And look at these startups. Capella Space providing SAR constellation, Palantir AI-powered data analytics, Planet Labs, Hawkeye 360, no Boeing, no Lockheed, because it needs all this, imagination and all this stuff. The good news is yesterday, or on the 21st September, when the Prime Minister went to Washington, we've done a semiconductor fab deal, and that is with Third ITech. The first order to Third ITech was given by the Indian Army. And so, we can take some pride in that. And today it's doing a deal with the US Space Com, and it's a very ambitious deal. And, so that points to the fact that, if all these startups and all, if we give them some impetus, we'll be in a pretty good shape. And the last point, I'll just take 1 minute that I would like to leave for your consideration is that we could also be in the midst of Cold War 2.0. Now, I quite understand that it's very different from Cold War I. There may be very few similarities, but look at what is happening. A new network is coalescing around China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. And look at what it's done. Iran gave Russia 3,000 low-cost drones. They set up a drone factory in Tatarstan. They're producing 300 to 400 drones per month. And that has resurged the Russian war effort. North Koreans, 2.5 million artillery rounds, and Russia is back in the game. So that visit of Mr. Putin to North Korea was a thank you visit. They really bailed them out when they were in deep trouble. China, of course, despite all the denials, now it's public knowledge, Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan are all saying, they gave them chips, microelectronics, jamming equipment, CNC equipment, glide bombs. So all this, has this contributed to this to the resurgence of the Russians. I'm getting a lot of indications to wind up, so I'll just do just that. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Ajai Malhotra has just joined us, and I would invite him to give us his remarks. He was supposed to start the discussion, so I covered up for him by giving a little bit, Ajay, of the background, the politics, which you will, of course, fill up. I didn't go before the Minsk Accords because I thought you would take us through what happened after the breakup of the USSR, the understandings on which Russia built its national security machine, how they were violated, how red lines were crossed, and today the situation we are in from India's perspective, where there is Cold War 2.0, the West expects us to regard West's problems as our problems, but the West does not think our problems are the West's problems. That is the conundrum which India faces in the middle of Cold War 2.0. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you, Ambassador Mukherjee, and dear distinguished speakers on the dais and members in the audience. A quick apology for being delayed. Coming from Gurgaon, it's not always easy. I left an hour now, 45 minutes ago. But the point that Bhaswati made, this conflict in Ukraine it's a complex and a multidimensional one. And it's easy to look at it sometimes as a simple one, where one country, Russia, is saying, you're in my face, you're getting too close, I got a security problem. And other countries saying, I don't want that neighbor, I want to move away, I'm looking for security elsewhere. So it's really If you simplify it, it's down to two countries saying, help us sort out our security issues. And when you look at it that way, it should be a very simple thing to do. But let me bring out, and as Bhaswati said, I'll step back and try and draw out what is it that makes it so complex. The contemporary roots, I won't go too far back, but I'll start from 1990. Because that is when Western leaders engaged in discussions with Gorbachev regarding the post-Cold War European security landscape that should be there. And now records of these discussions are available. And you have these from many sources: American, French, British, Spanish, Italian, UN, etc. And all of them show, and these are available also on websites now, all of them show that the assurances were given to the Russians, as James Baker famously put it in his, and it's recorded there in the minutes, not 1 inch eastward was the assurance being given to the Russians. That was, I recall, as 9th February 1990, and a day later, the same assurance was given by the Chancellor of Germany, Helmut Kohl, that, at best they may consider the rest of Germany, that was the GDR or East Germany, becoming a part of, when it becomes a part of Germany, being a part of NATO, but nothing beyond that. And similar assurances were given by many others. Foreign Minister Genscher, President Mitterrand, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. So the Russians saw these as crucial assurances for Gorbachev, that they showed that there was consent for unification of Germany within NATO, and that they felt that the non-observance of these assurances was something which was really reneging on high-level assurances, and that would be unacceptable. There's a well-known Russian proverb, "Доверяй, но проверяй," trust but verify. And up here, the start of mistrust started from this very moment. I can tell you, maybe at this moment only, that I had a discussion with Mr. Gorbachev, and I can recall exact dates also, 4 October 2012 and 4 October 2013. The importance of the date, it's the date of German reunification. And on that day, the German embassy would have an event, and the chief guest was Gorbachev, because he had to bring it about as far as they were concerned. So on both these occasions, I spoke to him in private, one-on-one, and asked him this very question, that what was the assurance given to you by the Russians? So I want to even go by the record up here. And his, actually, version to me was even more specific. He said, I was told that NATO will not expand into the ex-Soviet space, less the Baltics. So it was not only what you have on record up there, but I have it personally from him. And the next year I asked him the same question again, almost in the same place. I thought, let me hear if he tells me something different. We had a friendship from earlier, but there was an opportunity where I sat with him, asking other things also, but we discussed this point. It was of interest to me also to know. He reiterated exactly the same. So when we look at it, now let me move a little faster. By 1995, I think Yeltsin and the sort of love with capitalism had subsided by them, and they had seen the limitations of going down a purely capitalist path. In fact, at one stage, they were far more capitalist than any country in the West. It was kind of unbridled capitalism up there. And so you had a shift in foreign policy brought about when Primakov replaced Andrei Kozyrev. Andrei Kozyrev, as you may know, is sitting comfortably in Miami right now in Florida, and has been there after he left. So this brought about a shift, and even in Russian foreign policy, but it was a weakened Russia, So when in 1999, the bombing of Serbia took place, of Belgrade in particular, you found that the Russians, I mean, there's a famous story of Primakov turning his plane around and coming back. He was on his way to USA and he said, "We're not going," when he heard the news. But beyond that, they didn't do much. So there's a point out there also. 2000, Putin became the president of Russia, and his tenure started with a cautious approach towards the West. He was in favor of a strong Russia, and I think within a year or two, the West, by 2002, more or less, the West understood that this is not somebody who would toe our line, and there was a desire to kind of, how should I put it, to unseat him, to replace him by a more pliant leader. And that has continued since then. I have seen it in different ways and different approaches, but I think that is very much so. So 2004, you have the first NATO expansion, you have the three Baltics join and the four East Europeans. That didn't bother. And when I look back to what Gorbachev told me, I understand, yeah, the Russians weren't too bothered by that because the three East Europeans were Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia, and the three Baltics are, you know them. Now 2007, you have the Munich Security Conference, and you have Putin's statement up there, a very important statement. If you are in academics, you need to read that. I think it's where he criticized NATO's expansion as reflecting a betrayal of promises made during the process of dismantling of the Soviet Union, and said that it undermines trust and security, and something needed to be done. So that's 2007. 2008, you have a sort of response, more or less, when you have the Bucharest summit, and you find there NATO agreed that Ukraine and Georgia will eventually become their members. Okay, so 2008 you find Russian pushback. Okay, because I think Putin could see, okay, is that the response? And you find the move into Georgia. You find South Abkhazia and South Ossetia, if you're familiar with the Russian situation, which were two constituent parts of the Georgian Republic. And so they separated Russian intervention, like in Ukraine, Russian intervention. Abkhazia and South Ossetia separate and become independent and remain independent till now. And you might well ask, what is the difference between Russian intervention then and now? Why have these other republics, so-called the People's Republic of Luhansk, Donetsk, etc., why have they joined and these two haven't, even now? The reason is those are distinctly not Russian republics. The Abkhaz are a different people. I recall in 1984 going to Abkhazia, and we had met Shevardnadze, the leader in Tbilisi, and we came down to Abkhazia. And we had a dinner, a banquet, and the ambassador was speaking, nice thing, we met your leadership in the capital, and here we are, lovely Abkhazia, this and that. And the gentleman next to me, who was the chief aide of the head of the government out there, the chief Communist Party functionary, was seated next to the ambassador, and this guy was seated. He turned to me and said, "Please tell your ambassador not a further word about Georgia. We are not Georgians, we are Abkhaz." I'm talking 1984. So there was such strong feeling. And after 2 minutes, my ambassador was very politely saying, and how lovely, ballet and opera and all we saw in Tbilisi, and, beautiful streets and those balconies. And this guy, he really got, a little shirty with me. He said, if you don't tell your ambassador now, we will have to stop this banquet. So I went and told my ambassador, said, I'll explain to you later, but just cut out any reference to Georgia and the Georgian people. So there's a difference there. South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and so they have remained independent. They have 6 or 7 countries who recognize them, including Russia. Now, if you see what happened, and we'll come to that. So that's where we were. So 2010 to 2014, you had rising tensions over Ukraine. You had, in 2010, Yanukovych suspended the desire to, he was seen as pro-Russian, the desire of Ukraine to join NATO, and opted for neutrality instead. In November 2013, and this is 21 November 2013, I remember it. It's my birthday also, so it's an easy one. But on that day, Yanukovych refused to sign the association agreement with the EU. And from that moment on, things started going bad because NATO was all right, but with EU coming into play also. So you have 2013, 2014, you have the Euromaidan protests, you have the coup at Euromaidan. We're getting too long? 3 minutes? Okay. I will only be able to reach 22 then. Okay. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, I'll fast forward it. So you would know Victoria Nuland, Ambassador Pyatt, etc. And that night of the coup, you have the meeting of the Russian Security Council, not many have noticed this, and they take decisions on what to do, which was really Crimea, etc., and what to do there. You can look at that in question and answers if anyone wants. So you have the pro-Russian separatists who declare independence, Donetsk, Luhansk, etc. Russia does not recognize them. They recognize them only just before 22, before the intervention or the special operation or the invasion takes place. So yeah, now I wanted to point out two things up there, and then I'll maybe just limit myself to this part of it. You have the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements, the Normandy 4, they reached agreements, but later on in December 22, it is made clear. Yeah, the Minsk agreements are, who are the parties? France, Germany, Ukraine, Russia, known as the Normandy 4. And the essence of it is autonomy for that part of Ukraine, Donetsk, Luhansk, etc., and giving respect to the linguistic rights of Russian speaking. That means in schools you could have Russian as a second language, etc. Absolutely, innocuous stuff, and in any country they would have probably been accepted. But as it turns out, in December 22, we get the information again. Angela Merkel, in her interview to Die Zeit, confirms that this was an attempt to give Ukraine breathing space. It had no meaning. It was not meant to be. And this is also confirmed by President Hollande, the French president, who also participated in the Minsk agreement process. So basically, when Putin was asked, now we're talking of December 22, the invasion was February 22, and he said, well, this is totally unexpected and disappointing. I would say rather soft words, but then he was party to that, so he cannot be that critical about it. But in any case, it showed bad faith. Let me just quickly walk you through the peace negotiation. I've spoken something of the war now, very quickly on the peace negotiation. Nothing much happening there, so I can summarize it quickly. Little progress towards peace, yeah. You had 4 days after the invasion, you had the peace talks in Belarus. You had 2 or 3 rounds. Again, the Russians sent an important negotiator, but nothing came out of it. You had the first high-level meeting in March 22, mediated by Turkey between Ukraine and the Russians. So fairly soon they were already talking. And the special military operation clearly was meant that, we show that we're not happy, and that will bring the other side to the table. But then you had the Istanbul talks, again, a significant movement, and later on we know that there was agreement there, but this was disowned. We have it from authoritative sources. We have it from Prime Minister Naftali Bennett of Israel, and we have it from the Ukrainian politician David Arachamia, and now we have it about 10 days ago from Victoria Nuland herself. So that it shows that, there's something to think about. So after those talks, we had a lot of efforts to break you would have seen about the Boris Johnson visit, etc., where he went and advised, etc. So after that, you had many attempts to break the diplomatic stalemate. Some succeeded, where you looked at the grain deal, etc., to help the Ukrainians out. So it was not complete ill will or warlike action by the Russians, and yet others didn't. You had the escalation of efforts. You had Turkey, China, Brazil, but both sides refused to budge on core issues. And as the Russians saw they're moving ahead, I think, unless the Ukrainians step forward with something new, nothing much is going to happen. The Chinese proposal, you had the 10-point peace plan, and again, India took part in it, but did not sign up on the communique, which was the right thing to do. It was a one-sided document. Russians did not participate. And now they're talking of a victory plan. So, they have to think out what they want to do. But the short point is that peace plan was also presented, didn't go anywhere. And now it's going to be much more difficult because I think things will change only when the facts on the ground change. At the moment, it's, I would say, if you look at this war, and I'll end with these last 2 minutes, if you look at this war, there are many facets to it also. You have the international version of it, which you read through Herald Tribune and Washington Post, which has, Ukrainians are not doing too badly, etc. You have the domestic version and the influence, and you find there's a rather solid support for what Russia is doing domestically. Even the Levada figures, etc., have gone up in numbers. And even more so now, you find that the domestic support is there. The economic warfare, I mean, up there, I think the Russians have the upper hand. The economy is doing far better. The Germans are sinking. The French are in trouble. The British aren't doing too well either. So you have then the IT warfare up there. In that space, you have initially the West was winning, but I think now, so you can see the effort to try and corner Russian media. So, and therefore, Russian media has also been put on notice by the West. But if you look at Telegram and if you look at X, you find that there is much more access for them. So with that, and the others, this space warfare, which has not yet begun, but which also lies ahead. But that's where we are at the moment. Peace negotiations haven't gone very far. The war, and on the ground, Russia is in a far more dominant position. And with that, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ajay, for taking us through the political perspective, which then makes the military perspectives so much more scary and easy to understand. I have great pleasure in requesting Lieutenant General Khandare to speak, to give us a perspective on what it also means for India, and to give us this assessment that given the current state of stalemate on the ground, given the fact that the US presidential elections are not very far off, whether the military assessment is that this conflict can only come to an end once we know who is the next American president, how much money, arms, munitions they are willing to spend on this intractable conflict, and eventually the peace agreement will be signed between the great powers, that is to say the United States and the Russian Federation, because ultimately it would appear to us sitting here in Delhi that it's going to result in the acceptance of a stalemate, which means that Zelensky will have to accept that chunks of Ukrainian territory will go back to the Russian Federation. That is my assessment. I would request General Khandare to take up on that point. Thank you.
Good evening to all of you. Thank you, Ambassador Mukherjee. My regards to Ambassador Malhotra, General Raj Shukla, Professor Manish Dabhade, and a lot of dignitaries here, and most importantly, the students in the gathering. As I focus my talk, in addition to what Ambassador Mukherjee has said, I want to make it and keep it absolutely simple, especially for the students and the research scholars, and draw lessons as relevant to this part of the world and particularly to India. So let me start by saying every nation has to decide on what is its own national interest. You don't become a frontline state for the sake of others and don't get pushed around and ruin your own country. You look at what's happening there and look at what happened when Pakistan joined the global war on terror and what happened to Pakistan, and they're still suffering. So you've got to correlate and draw lessons from that. The second part is every time shock and awe really doesn't matter. it doesn't succeed, especially if you have an adversary with tremendous amount of national resilience and able to put up a fight till the last ounce of blood. And that's exactly how you see Ukrainians fighting. One more important lesson, military lesson here is your best troops will perish the first, because maximum attrition and maximum brutality in the initial stages when everything possible is available to you and you still haven't run out of ammunition. And essentially, this war, if I were to say, to a large extent is an artillery war. You see the kind of artillery ammunition which is being fired all over. And that is the reason when your best troops are either in cemeteries or in hospitals, you need the second line. And that's where India needs to focus. Where is our second line? If I look at officers' second line, you have short service officers who've gone out. They can always come back if they are within that age and medical condition. When you look at the other ranks, the subordinate ranks, we definitely don't have. And that is where this Agniveer scheme is coming handy. Let it happen. It will bring out one major deficiency which will get covered. Every year, if about 30,000 soldiers go out, in 10 years, you'll have about 3 lakhs. So that's about a quarter of what you're holding today. So that is one more lesson that you need to look. You have a national vision of 2047. 2047 means war avoidance is the best strategy for us. That's the best possible way that you can continue to grow as long as you don't compromise on your sovereignty. So that's another lesson that you need to look at. Many strategists and analysts kept on saying that if you have economic heft, wars will be avoided. That doesn't happen. Another fallacy is short wars. Which is a short war? A stronger adversary will always aim and want a short war, while the weaker will want to prolong it as much as you can. But here what's happened? Here Russia is actually bleeding Ukraine to a level where the human capital is just shifting and it is becoming pure human resource which may not be best trained. You see the number of people who are leaving Ukraine. See the number of people who are not capable of fighting today. Yes, it is to their credit that they are still standing up and fighting. That's a separate issue altogether. Many a time people feel that international support, if you are in the good books of people, it will help. It hasn't helped. It just doesn't help. There are countries who will push you to fight a war with their own interests, whether it's Doklam, whether it is Galwan. The superpowers or the powers that be will want to assess the technology of their ultimate adversary through your war. And the other thing is, at the end of the war, they will come and demand a pie from the reconstruction and rehabilitation. And during this time, when wars happen, the military industrial complex of other countries are actually looking at profits. So whenever there is a war of this kind, the military hardware that you demand or you want is never at your terms and it is never at the cost, quantity and quality that you need. When I'm talking of military industrial complex, let me also tell you that Ukraine had or still has a good military industrial complex, and interestingly Russia and Ukraine military industrial complexes were joined at the hip, but somehow it doesn't seem to be happening. But very interesting observation of mine is there are certain companies, there are certain firms which are the cutting edge manufacturing units in Ukraine. They haven't been bombed as severely. Russia possibly was looking at or is still looking at taking them the way they are. Does it bring to your notice a possibility in Taiwan where the semiconductor business also is one of the insurances for Taiwan? But can war waging be done in a manner that the prized possessions of that country are left intact and you are able to use that? Zoria, Motosich, these are the companies which are the big ones. They're the ones for aero engines. They are the ones for gas turbine engines. They are there. In the eastern part of Ukraine, there are still more strategically important industries, which particularly are relevant to Russia for the ICBMs upgrade. The ICBMs are about 10 years old now, and obviously their upgrades are required at some stage. So wars are unique, strange. How are they fought depends on a lot of strategic thought. The only thing here which comes out after every war is wars flow in a very unique manner. They are strange. You cannot predict what kind of an end you'll have. So that is one issue. And when Ambassador Mukherjee asked me that what is the end of the war and how is the negotiation going to take place, all these factors are going to come there. Who's going to keep what they want? So there'll be a lot of pulling and pushing between the West and the victors. And it's always been seen rules are decided by the victors. So again, who's interested in a stalemate is a very big question. Who's interested in resolving that issue is also a question. As far as my understanding is, I don't think Russia is interested in stopping it at all. Okay. Let me come to another major issue is about use of unconventional means during conventional war. This is a very unique war where the First World War tactics are also being utilized and the latest modern war tactics are also being utilized, and so are the weaponries being used. Have you ever imagined that the Russian Navy suffers from drones or unmanned systems which have absolutely no potential, but then they possibly saw the vulnerability of the Russian Navy and they used drones or the unmanned autonomous systems, surface, aerial, underwater, and caused a major embarrassment to the Russian Navy. And that too coming from a country like Ukraine, which doesn't have a significant navy. So here is the point. CIPRI figures are not always to be taken as the deciding factor that the bigger army or the bigger armed force or the stronger so-called CIPRI bean counting will win. It is how you fight. It is not what you have. It is how you fight. And that's not only visible today, even in our ancient history, it has always been so. So if you are able to come up with good plans and you have the best possible training, then it will make a difference. So while there is a quality required, there is a quantity also required, but brilliance of leadership is also most essential, making plans and taking them right to the end. The kind of war waging material, very interesting phenomenon during this particular war. The West was looking all over the world for artillery ammunition, all over the world, including India. It's a different story that we didn't want to be a party to anybody, and that's a separate story altogether. But we had people coming around scouting for ammunition. Jo hai de do, that kind of a feeling. But what did Russia do? 3 shifts a day. 3 shifts a day means what comes out of it? Self-reliance. If you are able to get your act together of self-reliance, maybe it takes time, and that is where you have to plan yourself that within these couple of years that you have a window, you want to keep a window using your diplomacy, you better get your act right and get the most important things which you require to wage a war or for deterrence on your soil. You want technology, then go the way of how you want to do it. There are methods, transfer of technology, it doesn't work. You have licensing arrangement, doesn't work. So the present arrangement which is working is the joint ventures, and that is what we seem to be working towards. So that is another lesson for us. You have economic resources on which others are dependent. You are able to weaponize it, and that's what exactly Russia did. And during this chaos and confusion that happens, whether it's 2014, what happened in Crimea, or subsequently, what is a special campaign, it's not a war declared, But whatever happens during this confusion, there are others who are smart players who definitely come into this and possibly extract what they can do. Are you aware that China has acquired land in that particular area as big as the size of Belgium? How many of you knew this? Please raise your hands. What for? You know, the vulnerability of China is towards food security, and they've taken huge area of land in this particular Crimean peninsula, and they want to cultivate and use that for their own energy security and food security. Lesson learned: let people fight, do what you want for your own country, and that's exactly, I think, what one is seeing happening. The whole world is doing it, so there's nothing that is right or wrong. What is best is what needs to be seen. Okay. 2 minutes? Okay. Yes, please. Okay. One important point before I take my seat is space. You know, when we started, everyone thought that this is not going to go to the space domain. It went to the space domain. Whatever dismembering of space assets was done, was done. Ukraine people did crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and were able to get the space assets up. In addition to that, the West may have funded, but you suddenly saw private industry coming up and putting satellites in space. In addition to that, this war possibly is the most well documented digitally. Everyone has been using his mobile phone and capturing images, and that has been a good way of exchanging intelligence also. But at the same time, the Russians have suffered because those people who are using these cell phones for communicating and their positions got disclosed, and in the bargain, there were huge losses. So that is another thing. So if you have to fight a war today, the modern war, it has to be a smart war. You have to be trained for it, you have to be conditioned for it, and who? It is the entire citizenry which has to be conditioned. It cannot be left only to the armed forces. This is too serious a job, and I think the responsibility of entire nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for a few questions. I'd just like to say that from what we've heard from our very distinguished speakers, the lesson for India, in my perspective, is what the first speaker said, which is India should make the best of the present peace dividend to prepare for the inevitable conflict with China, which will come. When that conflict with China will come, as always, we will have to handle it alone. We have handled every conflict alone. We are a big country. This is not 1962. We will give back as good as we get. But we should have no illusions that any country will come to our assistance. The elephant will have to face the dragon alone. That's the first lesson that we've learned from today's discussion. The second, as Ambassador Ajai Malhotra took us through, is that red lines are drawn up between major powers and then they are crossed when one major power believes that the other major power has weakened. That may be strategically correct or strategically wrong, but once a red line drawn up between major powers gets crossed, there is an imbalance in the balance of power, which then affects international peace and security. And the third lesson, which we've learned from our final speaker, whom I'd also like to congratulate, is that every country has to draw its own lesson on its own national security. And it has to do what it takes for safeguarding its security. So it's not a question of make America great again or make Germany great again. As far as we are concerned, we were colonized for 188 years. We missed out on the Industrial Revolution. Nobody helped us. Pakistan was created so that India would remain a small sub-regional power. Today, the India of 2024, we are conscious. We have to do what it takes to safeguard our national security. And for that, every citizen has to be prepared. We can't just depend on our armed forces. We will now take questions and answers. We can't go beyond 15 minutes. So I'll try and take 3, 4 questions and then request my colleagues to pass the mic around. Who would like to ask the first question, gentlemen, on that?
Good evening, everyone. I'm from Ukraine.
You're from Ukraine.
Yes.
So then it's very appropriate you should be the first to speak.
Yes, absolutely.
Please. Yes.
So first of all, I would like to thank everyone who calls Russia-Ukraine war as war, not the conflict, not the special operation or something like this, but call a spade a spade. So it's
You
quite
have
an
to
important
ask a
thing.
question only.
Yes,
Just ask a
yes,
question.
just a very small thing. If we speak about the broken promises, I think it is important to start speaking about Budapest Memorandum, because actually this is the first broken promise when Russia agreed to for security assurances to Ukraine in exchange of the largest nuclear arsenal, and they actually broke these promises. And Western countries, they are now trying to follow their promises to help Ukraine in this. So let's see it from this perspective. And again, when you
Okay,
speak,
thank you. We've got
okay,
it.
the
and
question,
my colleague will answer that question.
the question
I have
is,
to pass the mic on to the next speaker. So please conclude what you're saying. Please finish. Please, do you have another question?
yes, just
Yes, please.
short. Yes. So when you speak about the different pretexts for invasion, do you believe that they are more important than international law? Because what we hear from Prime Minister of India, from Minister of External Affairs, they speak about UN Charter and international law, but invasion is in no way it's following international law. Do you think that Russia behaving in a right manner by invading, by creating a pretext, while Ukraine is just fighting anti-colonial war, same
Right.
as
Let's go to the
India
second
did?
question, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Malhotra, the way Prime President Putin asked to be a peacemaker for India and Brazil and China, do you think India is going to play this type of role or it will avoid? And second thing is that the way you said, Sir General Khandare, and the manpower is a big issue for Russia now. And President Putin has asked his citizens to go for sex during lunch break and tea break. Do you think this is such a urgent problem for them? And third thing is, Sir General, yeah, can Russia think of that's called a space war or
Right.
yeah.
We'll take 2 more questions and then I'll ask the panel to respond. We have to pack up.
I'm Aditya. I'm a PhD candidate in JNU. I have a question for Ambassador Malhotra. So you mentioned about the famous not an inch eastward. So my question is very simple and specific. How did the Russians perceive the eastward movement? What was the incentive of the NATO allies to move towards Russia if they had already promised that we would not move an inch eastward? What changed?
Yeah. I would like a woman student to ask a question, please. Which woman student is going to ask a question? Raise your hand. There's one brave lady who's asking a question. That's the Miranda House spirit. Please go ahead. Yeah.
So my question is regarding the Chinese military-industrial complex. What role it has to play in Ukraine?
To our dear friend from Ukraine. Yes, yeah, I know. So that's the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. And just to point out that, and you can check this, 19 February 2022, that is like 5 days before the invasion. It is an invasion, you have crossed our international border. Zelensky said at the Munich Security Conference that that memorandum must be revised so that Ukraine could again rearm as a nuclear power. So I'm just pointing this out, that when we talk also of unprovoked, there are many things out there. I didn't have the time to give you all of them, but that's one of them that needs to be looked at. Yes, that the Budapest Memorandum, by the way, had other guarantors also. What about them? They also didn't do anything. And the point is, on that basis, Ukraine had agreed to become a non-nuclear state. And Well, that was the basis on which that agreement was reached. And that was under pressure not only from Russia, but especially from the West, because at that stage it wasn't clear where Ukraine was heading or what is going to happen with the situation in Ukraine. And at that stage, there was no tussle between Russia and Ukraine in any case. So let's just bear that in perspective. And when we talk of, if you see earlier, many in the West used to talk of unprovoked, unprovoked invasion, etc. Now they stopped using it because the fact that there have been provocations on all sides is very clear. To us looking from here, we can see that there are provocations, long-standing provocations. And if you see also some of the facts are not well known. For example, about Crimea, and if there's, I can share that with someone. The discussions which took place when the Belovetska agreement was signed with Kravchuk, Shushkevich, and Yeltsin, and the discussions which are now not of the agreement itself, but which took place at that moment. So now all those RODs are available. You can read, and you can see that there was great uncertainty. Kravchuk asked Yeltsin, okay, this is fine, we are dismantling the Soviet Union, but what happens to Crimea? And Boris Nikolaevich, as he said, what happens to Crimea? And Yeltsin said, no, ladna, we'll see later, let it be, set it aside. But so even at the moment of the creation of the state, there was an understanding that there are some issues that will be looked at later. So I'm just pointing out that there are many things out there that need to be brought into focus when we discuss these issues. There was a question about being, I've just written peacemaker.
There was a question about Brazil and others, but I think it's not addressed to you. We'll come back.
No, so there was a question about not an inch eastward. And you had you're right. When that was stated, it was clear that it was in the context of German reunification, point one. But it was also clear that this is a commitment made at the highest level. I mean, when you're talking of President Mitterrand, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, George Herbert Walker Bush, and so on. You name them, all of them. You have at least 7 major countries and at least 11 RODs written by different foreign offices, which are on the record saying the same thing. That means there is a commitment out there that you will not move this forward. And so how did the Russians view as this happened? The first lot, and that understanding came to me when I understood what Gorbachev told me. The first lot, nobody made a noise. 2004, you had the 3 Baltics went and the 4 East Europeans. Everyone was happy. And if you see now also, when everyone says, oh, Sweden and Finland have joined NATO and this and that, but the Russians aren't saying anything about it because there was no agreement, there was no commitment, there was no understanding. But they're saying if into the ex-Soviet space you step in, then you're violating the understanding that we had when we dismantled the country. And so there's something to think about there. So when you say not an inch eastward, I think there are slightly different versions. In fact, the French had added on saying that we need to see how we can adapt this to see how we have a new European security arrangement which take Russia and the rest of the Europeans into account. But that was just one of the other proposals. But just pointing out that there were many add-ons which were not only not an inch eastward, but hey, maybe we could partner up. And if you see the Russia-NATO arrangements that started 2000, 2001 and 2, partnership arrangements. Now they are obviously, irrelevant, but there was a desire to find a good solution. And even from Yeltsin's side, from Putin's side, when he spoke of a common economic space from Vladivostok to Lisbon, and this is what really caused the fear in the minds of the Americans, as I see it, because you saw it as a direct threat to the Anglo-American alliance, which had maintained the peace since after the Second World War. Because if Russia partners up with the Europeans, even in an economic sense, Russia and Germany a big, exporting powerhouse, Russia with all its minerals, that would be very competitive, with cheap gas, etc. And you had to not let it happen. And you see all this Nord Stream stuff and all, you'll understand that better when you understand what all these things are about. Sorry.
Not at all. I just wanted to add to what um, Ambassador Ajay Malhotra has said, that I went to a JNU lecture recently where one of these countries that has moved from neutrality to NATO told me privately that the NATO Secretary General has told the head of state that if Russia occupies that particular country, they should be aware that it will take NATO at least 2 years to liberate them. So the answer I asked her was that in that case, wasn't it better to have remained neutral, because then there would have been no fear of waiting for 2 years to be liberated? Was it worth moving from neutrality to NATO status? Over to you, General Shukla.
So I'll just very quickly pick on three issues which I think I can answer. First was this question, the lady from Miranda House. So China, Russia, Kissinger is believed to have, counseled his American colleagues that never let the bear and dragon come together. And American statecraft followed that advice precisely in its breach. And there's also some strategic innocence here. I remember Ian Bremmer, when the conflict broke out, said 3 months and Russia will be on its knees. Sanctions. Didn't work. Antony Blinken said China can do anything but no military equipment. Now see what the Chinese have given. Jamming equipment, CNC equipment, chips. World War II was won on steel, aluminium. Current wars are on chips. From drones to hypersonics, chips. You would notice Russian air power was out of reckoning for a whole time. Till the Chinese chips put on legacy bombs, and those glide bombs are creating havoc. So I make this case that the Russian military-industrial complex would not have resurged without absolute Chinese collaboration. This point about space, just reflect on it. This has been a war of geniuses. Elon Musk, Alex Karp. So what does Elon Musk do? The Russians mount a very severe cyberspace attack. American Space Corp satellites are disabled. American Space Corp. In steps in Elon Musk with that famous tweet. And what does it do? Starlinks enables, Zelensky to communicate with global council, street resolve, troop morale, artillery targeting. What General Khandare was saying, Ukraine doesn't have a navy. Crude drones with Starlinks have kicked the iconic Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol. I mean, look at sheer genius. Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir, he just drives across, he smells a business opportunity, so what if it's combat? He goes to the Polish border, seeks a meeting with Zelensky, doesn't get it, he walks across, meets Zelensky, and very quickly he just tells him, sir, just give us all your data. We'll give you AI-enabled services free. So when people talk of AI in the distance, AI is happening in Ukraine. Alex Karp, and why is he doing it? Smart guy, all the data that he gets, he'll use it to produce global products and services all over the world. So it's a war of genius space. Just one last point I would like to make. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee said, I'm not making an argument of a fight with China. I'm saying fail-proof your deterrence. China is a smart actor. If they don't see weaknesses, they'll back off. Yeah. So fail-proof deterrence so that, we have to keep improving. Galwanvi said, why did the Chinese attack us? That's not the fair question. The question is, why did we let him attack us? So it has to be fail-proof deterrence, and we can do it only if we move on a couple of fronts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last speaker for today, General Khandare.
Firstly, what you said about Russian manpower, Russia is not in such a bad state as Ukraine. And what I was emphasizing is that the Russians have pushed their manpower to do 3 shifts a day. And is that how it's happening everywhere? Yes, it happens. Even today, Israel is doing 3 shifts a day in their fight to Gaza. So it cannot be a 9-to-5 job anymore when a country is at war. So that's something which we all have to learn also. This is the first part. The second part about space and the way it has been employed, what General Raj Shukla has said, that is one part. The second part is, here you have different levels of technology and different methods of war fighting which is going on. So if you have a large number of satellites, which may be of anybody, but you have a combination of public and private sector, it can really help. So in October 2021, when the Prime Minister of India goes public and says, defense space sector is open for private, this is exactly what he's trying to do, that it's not only the government or the public sector which will be able to satiate your hunger for issues to be resolved from space. So you have to make both your hands work simultaneously. Chinese military industrial complex. Now, what, in addition to what General Raj Shukla said, these many things happen which happen directly between Russia and China. In addition to that, there are large number of drones which Russia has taken from Iran. Where are the parts coming from? So while Iran may be doing a lot of assembling, integrating, but there is a direct and an indirect contribution. So again, we have to look at the entire ecosystem that is functioning. So even if you do not have the capability, but if you have robust relationships and alliances and partnerships, it will help in your overall national resilience. And that's where it is important for the diplomacy to be robust. It is important for diplomacy to be agile and form relationships even when the war is going on.
Thank you very much. I think Ambassador Ajai Malhotra said he remembered one last question.
Yes, I remember this question, so let me just answer it. It seems a little unfair to leave him. So yeah, the point is that if you remember Modi's homily to Putin, that now is not the time for war. In, I think, September 22, now it's some time ago, at the SCO summit. So since then, we have seen wars actually blooming elsewhere in West Asia, etc. Even today, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., and Israel are in a kind of struggle out there. And our Prime Minister just met PLO President Mahmoud Abbas again, which shows that when he's talking of these, he's reaching out to everyone on all sides. So, but beyond making a homily, things have to be done. So now you can see that he's carrying the message of dialogue and diplomacy and humanitarian concerns to others. And so you've seen the conversations held with Putin, Biden, Zelensky, and others. And all of these help clear the air. So we don't have a dialogue or negotiation position yet, but these frequent exchanges which are taking place, you won't know the details till something substantive comes out, but the frequent exchanges that are taking place are to be welcomed because they show immense goodwill on our part and our desire to find solutions and not just leave it to homilies voiced nicely and at the right moment, but not adding up too much as time passes. So that's really what, when we talk of India as a peacemaker, I think that's the direction which we're heading. It's in the interests of India and also of the other countries of the global south. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to add, in response to what our Ukrainian colleague said about respecting international law, that when China walked into Indian territory in 1962 and took over Aksai Chin and large chunks of our territory, who spoke for India that its territory had been taken and international law had been violated? So it goes back to what I said, to what my colleagues have said. You know your core national interests, know how to defend it, and take it where it takes. Because if you are weak, nobody is going to speak up for you, whether international law is violated or not, because international law exists only for strong states. I'd like to ask you to give the vote of thanks.
And
I think this
Ukraine
session
violated international
comes
law by
to
crossing into Kursk.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic discussion, and I think I really want to highlight. In fact, before I give a formal vote of thanks, three key lessons I think from what the conversations today. One is about the wars. I mean, the whole concept of short war, the shock and awe. I think that is really passé now. So I think we need to remember that, and also the point about the quality of forces. I think that is so important. CIPRI, I mean, year after year, they talk about military balance, and we've been looking at it. But ultimately, the quality of forces does matter, the resilience of societies, leadership. I think it's a very important issue which we need to discuss when we're talking about the war. I mean, the whole thing of private actors now coming into play. Here, I think I would like to recommend, please do have a look at the CSIS. This is Center for Strategic International Studies. They have just come out with a report yesterday, in fact, which was titled The Russia-Ukraine War, a study in analytic failure. So what really happened? Was it overestimation of Russian capacities, underestimation of the Ukrainian resolve? I think these are very important points. So please do have a look at the report. So with this, I really want to thank Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee for shepherding this, in fact, entire initiative and also today's session so brilliantly. Ambassador Ajai Malhotra, who braved the traffic to come all the way to join us. Lieutenant General Shukla, of course, and Lieutenant General Khandare. It's truly an honor to have you all with us today evening, and a big thanks to all of you who are here today with us. Thank you so much.